team, as well as our alumni engagement team. I'm part of the communications and design team, along with Catherine Lee and Vicky Wu. And we do a lot of the social media and marketing and graphic design work for the ACC, but we're also interested in how we can make more visible the works and the perspectives of Asian American artists and creatives at Yale through so I'll hand it over now to Dan to say a little bit about the alumni engagement team and to introduce our guest. Oh, you're muted.
Thank you, Alice, for telling us about what we're here today for. I'm very excited that everyone showed up tonight to be with us to talk in dialogues about what community building means through the arts. And so to introduce myself, I'm Dan Nguyen. I'm a junior studying economics and anthropologies. And I'm part of the alumni engagement team with Alice Liu and Jennifer Q, who's also here today. We're very passionate about connecting current Yale students to alumni who have done amazing work with their careers to support inspiring missions. So we truly believe that every Yale has the power to encourage one another to always make the most of the communities around us and continuously support missions in the community that we are a part of. So with that being said, we're so excited to collaborate with communication design team to host our discussions with our very own Yale alum, Lee Ngo. Everyone please join me in welcoming Lee. You can do a thumbs up or any kind of indications in directions. But yeah, happy that you're here. So to introduce Lee, he's graduated from Yale in 2005 and also has a master's degree of anthropology from UC Irvine. He's an entrepreneur and a writer, currently serving as the founder partner of East, providing over 14 years of experience in media, education, marketing, academia, filmmaking, management, and technology. He previously served as the Chief Operating Officer of the Greater Foundation, an education nonprofit funded by Amazon and NFL. So Lee stayed very active in the film festival scene of Seattle, LA, Hawaii, and beyond. Yeah, so, but aside from all that formality, I think Lee is a very open and happy person who are here to help us understand what it means to be a real adult. Like honestly, any questions about what it's like to graduate Yale in a crazy town, what it's like to be at Yale in a crazy town, and being in a non-traditional career path that not everyone thought of they would be in as an undergraduate. He's here to answer your questions. So we're just here to facilitate a conversation. Feel free to be very candid about engage with us during the time together. But before we start, I have some housekeeping announcement to make. So we'll have 30 minutes of the event for moderated questions that we have for me. And then the event, which is 20 minutes, will be open up for Q&A from you guys. And participants are muted to make the conversation flow for now because we want to avoid background noises, but you guys are welcome to speak during Q&A or raise your hand anytime during the conversation to directly engage with Lee. And we also have a link called from Paul EV for you to type in questions if you're shy and don't want to speak of or like ask your question directly. You can type a question in there, and then we'll vote to see which questions are most wanted, and we'll ask at Q&A. But yeah, with all of the housekeeping, we can start going into the questions. 1 second. And yeah, Lee, super happy that you're here today. And we know that community building has been at the heart of every successful organization, as well as our time at Yale. So to kickstart the conversation, could you tell us a little bit about what community means to you during your time at Yale and after graduation?
Absolutely. First, I just want to say it is overwhelming and fantastic to see all these wonderful faces, especially in such strange circumstances, I think, for a lot of you who are currently going to school right now. And my heart feels for you, especially those who are graduating and also aren't able to attend their graduation in the traditional sense. But I'd like to, I guess, start on that note that that you might feel like that's a disappointment, but I think what it really is a defining opportunity for all of you. So I graduated 15 years ago, and I went to, and I actually started my undergraduate experience in 2001. So 2 weeks after I started, orientation day and, just moving into Bingham with, I was a part of now Hopper, but formerly called something else. And we shared with Trumbull, and it was a very dangerous rivalry. But 2 weeks into that experience, after having what was supposed to be a typical college experience, was 9/11. And that really shaped and rocked us as well. And in a lot of ways defined not just my educational experience that I would have at Yale, but I think really defined a lot of us for this millennia. And so I look at this situation as, yeah, it's strange, and we are kind of struggling and adapting, but I think we're kind of growing and learning. And on the question of community, is like a lot of what you discover your community is very much defined by those circumstances. There are, for me, 5 communities that I think of when I think back to my times at Yale most fondly. One is being in the residential college at Hopper was awesome. Many of my very close friends and were there, and I think every college has its own nuance. I didn't read Harry Potter, but those who did were very much like, oh yeah, Calhoun at the time was like the Gryffindor, and like Trumbull's really like, I had no idea what they were talking about, but this is apparently how people think about these experiences, because that's very much indicative of the kind of community that they're trying to shape. What's wonderful is that a lot of it is student shaped as well. I was an aide to the head of my college, and that allowed me to run publications, support events, and then over time we started getting really more into filmmaking and encouraging me to actually network with filmmakers through my college. I was able to meet Dimitri Martin, actually sit next to him, because he's actually a Hopper 11 years before me. I met one of the recent Monty Python member who passed away. I believe it was Terry Gilliam. He actually came out to the college too. But perhaps like the most cool moment of that was I actually sat next to Ethan Cohen of the Cohen brothers, who was invited to our college to speak about their weird experiences. And it was just before No Country for Old Men, but after they did like short films called Paris Je t'aime, like these little short comedic films that were happening in Paris. And that's where, like, yes, I had a college experience, but there are certain aspects of my college experiences that were special, and they were special because somebody was looking out, or I actually put in a lot of that effort as well. I'd say the another major community was Visa for sure. I was engaged early on, and a lot of it was not just only because of my own curiosity, wanting to get more engaged with like the language of my parents, and but also learn about my history and culture. Growing up in Oregon, there weren't many opportunities for me to be exposed to that, and the opportunities I did receive, I didn't like a lot or didn't appreciate enough in time. It's been a fascinating journey how much I think I come back to this community here in Oregon, and like the educational community around Vietnamese are so much more developed and so much more established and really dedicated to learning, but they just weren't developed when many people were just 10, 15 years removed from their refugee experience. They just didn't have that infrastructure. So to me, my first infrastructure in learning like Vietnamese language and culture is Yale. And the person who is very much in like a big spearhead of that is in this call right now, Thay Quang. Like I didn't have a safe, fun experience learning Vietnamese until I had to go to Vietnamese class every day for introduction and intermediate Vietnamese. And to this day, like I'm glad, I think I got an A every time, but I wish I kept studying. I wish I took more advanced classes, and only because in my career right now, I am constantly speaking Vietnamese. I am constantly talking to people in Vietnam who mostly make fun of how bad my Vietnamese is, despite the fact that I'm supposed to be better at it, right? And yet I'm very grateful of what I've been able to learn, and that like it's almost just part of the culture to tease me anyway. But I learned enough and was committed enough because of the learnings that I had in college. There's much more to talk about. I think the last one I do want to talk about, which is kind of a strange thing for me, is that I was really into children's theater, and I was actually a very active member of YCT, but only for 2 years. There was a point in my undergraduate career where I just thought, I don't want to stick with this anymore. I want to do something else. And I actually left behind one community that loved me and was very much like, what's going on? Why don't you want to hang out with us anymore? Specifically, I was in martial arts at the time, but I just didn't want to do martial arts anymore. And instead I transitioned into children's theater. And the children's theater crew was just some of the best people I'll ever meet in my life. Just beautiful, wonderful, sweet, hilarious. They're all dedicated to great causes. Some of them do amazing things. One even went on, same year as me, went on to become the dean of Calhoun College before it became Hopper, and it was actually part of the transition. And we were buddies. We were like, she produced a version of Pinocchio that I was like co-starring in. I'm very proud of that credit. And it was, if all the things I've mentioned so far, they've been part of my development, but I would say working in children's theater has probably been the most fun and rewarding, and like the one outlet where I think when you're supposed to work really hard, you can just be absolutely fun and silly in that space. And I was grateful for that space to be created. So yeah, I mean, I would say these are the communities that I remember fondly, but I'll just be very honest, that like, it wasn't always this way, right? And being sort of this kid coming out of a suburb of Oregon, I came to Yale really not knowing what to expect, really not knowing much more than what my parents knew, who were just like, I knew everything that I knew came out of The Simpsons, and I was like, is it like everyone like Mr. Burns, right? And my parents were, are big like fans of just any major politician that has that name attached to it. And once I got in, they were just telling everybody like it was like the greatest thing in the world, right? But when I was there, I have felt very much the experiences of like exclusion, of classism, of racism, and sometimes the weird thing is I felt these things even from Asian American groups or even from Vietnamese American groups, where these issues become much more salient into the and I have a lot of difficulties like communicating how to like navigate those things, because in a way there's a part of college that I always felt that should be a little bit messy, that should be a little bit about like a rich but also a challenged cultural understanding towards that building of empathy across the board. And also the appreciation that like when I've had friends who would just say the most ridiculous things when we first met freshman year, we were like the closest buddies by senior year because of just those bonds that we had built up over time. And so and it took a lot of like fear, facing my fears, and it took a lot of like getting out of my comfort zone to understand that like everybody has a different approach, and you'd be amazed by who you will consider your friend by the end of your journey, if you just simply like make yourself available to it. So that might be the most long-winded question on community, and it might be a lot like that in general. So please jump in if I do this again. Like I am very, very difficult to moderate. Sorry.
No, I love every aspect of your answer. I think it's very candid. I think a lot of us thought about these questions too in our own time when we think that something else to say that is still, we have a lot of questions about, and I'm so glad that Hey Quang is on the call. Hey Quang, do you want to tell me a little bit about what Lee just
God.
Yeah.
I'm emotional. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's been like 15 years.
15? No, I think 15 years going. Yeah, like I'm like I have this mental obligation to speak Vietnamese, but I have to be forgiving and not. So sorry, Taiwan. 19 years ago, almost 20 years ago. 19 years. I was in your class for the first time. And you look exactly the same. How does he look? He looks exactly just like, I don't know how you do it.
That's really funny. There's a thing that like Vietnamese don't age. Maybe that's right.
Much older, actually. But Lee, you were more handsome.
Oh, I was pretty handsome. I was pretty good. Maybe more so. Actually, even people in Vietnamese class told me when I saw them, they was like, "Oh, you're much better looking now than you were in undergrad." I'm like, thank you. Yeah. Well, thank you, Ty.
That's really funny.
Yeah, I think the last time Taewang and I interacted, I do think this is important to mention, is I was applying in graduate school for a summer program to go study in Saigon for 8 actually straight weeks. And little did I know, when I mentioned the program, Ty was like, I actually am one of the co-organizers of this program, and like I usually go back and run it with the students. So yeah, you probably should talk to me. Like, I mean, like I would say when I was in undergrad, there were like a lot of people really fawn over certain professors. Before, I think, is it Provost now, Salave was still a professor teaching his class, and everyone's like, you got to take this class. And Bloom was there, and like and Kagan and Scully. They were all people who were like teaching there. But for me, like that's all cool, and that's very much part of the quintessential Yale experience. But like to me, was like didn't realize that like someone like Tai Wang is someone you got to know if you need to know everyone academically, and that's a very small, tight-knit network. So if you're interested in those kinds of things, like even being affiliated with the AACC, like they have the networks and they are making those connections available so that people can be much more to do exactly the kind of work that you're supposed to be doing, which is just to get connected. So thank you, Tai. He gave me a great recommendation, and it was by far the best learning experience of my life. Being on the first time I actually was in Vietnam is because of Taiwan. So
Yeah, that's really inspiring, because I do think that there's a lot of great support system at Yale, not just professors, but also peers that are very talented, as well as people who are just available to answer any of your questions and support you regardless of what you want to do. So that bring me into the questions of, because there's such great support system, but also a lot of challenges at Yale, how do you think for students who are interested in exploring the arts or any kind of non-traditional career path, not very available Yale students outside of how do you explore non-traditional careers? What advice you give to students who want to take a chance at trying something new? And do you know any valuable resources that Yale offer?
yeah, sure. So just to be clear, there are questions about like what kind of resources are available at Yale for people who are interested in careers in media. And you know, I will try to remember the ones that were most helpful to me. Does the Sudler Fund still exist? Yes, no, shaking hands.
Oh, no, yeah.
Oh no. Okay. So, but I remember at the time, that's what everybody who was working, like, I want to make a film. So let's make sure we apply for like $1,200 to go make a short film. And I would never spend all of it, but I ended up applying to like 3 different Sudler funds and getting them all because no one was really applying to them, and they were just kind of handing them out just to support these kinds of arts. And that's one of the cool perks of being at a university like Yale, is that they do have a lot of little grants here and there that mostly go unclaimed, or people just aren't looking kind of closely enough. They're maybe focusing on other things. But that was a huge way of just getting you know, enough money to do camera rentals and to do lighting and to do all this stuff. And the best part is they were all tied to the residential colleges. So if there was any excess fund left over, it would just go directly to the residential college. And sometimes those funds are reappropriated by the head however they want to. So when I was at Yale, we actually built a digital editing studio from leftover Sudler funds, and that just became like my private studio where like, all right, Lee is somehow the manager of this because he likes film. I'm like, yeah. So I just totally, I mean, I was somewhat democratic about it. Like I let people use it too, but like it was mostly if I needed a film project done, like it was my studio. It was like, and it was like a really sick studio. I think other things that those are the kinds of things that are important. I believe that everybody should travel. And I know it sounds like a blanket statement, but when it comes to being in a creative space or in media, you've got to learn to create cool stories. You've got to go get interesting stories about yourself and learn a lot of different perspectives. And you're not going to really learn enough of those just by being too much in New Haven and just kind of waiting for things to come to you. And only the other big reasons because there's so many resources just for travel, but just for travel for you to make it however you want to make it. And I realize now that's what I should have been doing too. I had friends who were like, I don't know why, but I'm going to Hong Kong for a couple of weeks. And it was mostly mentioning to me near a friend of mine who is from Hong Kong, and you're just staring at him like, why are you going to Hong Kong? It's like, well, you keep talking about Hong Kong the whole time. Now I just want to go. And apparently Yale has this affiliation in Hong Kong, so I'm just going to do it. And little things like that, they might seem weird or silly or intimidating. That's good. Like if you're curious, this is a time for you to be curious and explore something. And if it's great, make it the rest of your life. If it's not, move on to something else. But like I've never met a single person in my life that said, I really regret traveling to that country for a week or two. Like nobody says that. The people always like show off that kind of stuff. I think the one lesson for me, and I wasn't always the best at this, but I'm grateful for some of the relationships I've maintained since Yale is to collaborate, but not just necessarily collaborate and say, I've got a project, I want you involved in it. To actually say, I heard you got a project, I'd like to get involved, I'd like to help out somehow, and just give, right? I think I studied anthropology as a master's, and I studied sociology, but pretty much same thing. And the one lesson that we learned that from my anthropological lessons is that societies are built upon their generosity, and they're built when someone makes the first move into that space. And when you're in a space like a college where people are too nervous or afraid or might be in their own heads or a bit on the egotistical side, disabuse that and then jump in and just like offer yourself as a resource in this space, because it ends up being a wonderful way for you to build a network, get connected, show what you can do, and then start another conversation. It's like, hey, so I'm thinking of working on this. It's like, yeah, you know what? I know that working with you was a great dynamic. Let's keep that momentum going. And that was a lot of like some of the fun things that we did when we were out at Yale. It's like, hey, so Lee, I heard you do Taekwondo. Why don't you do some stunt coordinating for my film? And then like the next move is, Lee, you're not the worst ugly person. Maybe you'll be better looking in 15 years or so, but for now, do you want to be like next to this other person in this film? I'm like, sure. And then it just kind of snowballs from there. And I'm proud to say that many of the people that I did those kinds of projects with, we're still friends to this day. Like, we'll hang out in LA, we'll go karaoke, and we'll just talk about whatever work we're doing. And that's really how it works.
Sure.
I don't know.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense because I'm also an anthropology major, and I do think that it's all start from community and being able to offer yourself and just be open-minded to everyone else that you're know of. So yeah, that just closed the sections on bright college years at Yale, because it was a lot of for me personally. A lot of lessons I don't have in the space, so work, and those were the
Sorry, is everyone else losing Dan's sound too? Yeah.
Oh, all right. Yeah, I'll try, but can you hear me better now?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just wrapping up on the bright college years answer, because I do think that it's a very valuable lesson for everyone, not just as college students, but also like as working adults to be able to engage in community. Part of that's offering you skills no matter where you are. Yeah, Alex, you want to take us away and do next?
Yeah. Sorry, I want to note one thing. I just looked it up. We referred to the Sudler Fund that does still exist. It's basically the Creative Arts and Performing, the Creative and Performing Arts Awards, the CPA. So I guess we're just more used to referring to it as that, but get on that, guys. But again, Lee, it's so awesome to have you with us. Personally, I'm majoring in film, and I have a particular interest in family narratives and cultural productions that
Does Mark Lapadula still teach screenwriting?
I believe so, but I haven't
he's
class.
Awesome. No, I had a couple of teachers that were just fantastic because look, I majored in sociology, but I really kind of majored in film studies. But it's all gets mashed together in whatever your core class is.
Exactly. But yeah, I have a really strong interest in family narratives and cultural productions that emerge from communities of diaspora, and I mostly grew up in Cambodia and Malaysia. So I really aspire to go back there and make films out of stories from that region. So I really appreciate hearing about your journey, as I'm sure others here appreciate as well. So I'm interested in what your personal motivation was for pursuing a career in both media and entrepreneurship. Were there any specific experiences that come to mind that guided you in the direction that you went?
Yeah, so so I guess the weird thing to explain is that like I have always wanted to do this since I was 12, and it's weird because I grew up both being not supported and heavily supported into doing a career in media. And I think when you grow up like Vietnamese, there are certain like life expectations, but at the same time, there are certain ways that we exist and we engage and find passion and therapy that is media, right? Like I grew up nonstop on watching media from other people. And for me personally, I mean, I'm gonna be honest, I'm not the best reader. I don't read novels like normally. I read a lot in college, sure, and I read a lot in grad school, but I actually prefer to watch things, and I prefer to communicate visually. I like to draw. I like to express myself that way. Every time I do presentations, they're usually like 60 slides and like 5 words per slide, because I'm just like performing around them, because that's how I communicate. And so when I was in high school, I finally went to a film class and was like, yeah, this is what I'm doing for the rest of my life. And I applied to a lot of different schools. and got into a few actually film undergrad schools, but ended up compromising, but not really, on Yale. Um, and you know, but really because once I explored and spoke to people who went to Yale and said, well, there is a film program there, and there are people who are in the film industry or whatever who went to the school. So like, perhaps I could make this work too. And I would say the first thing is when I was at Yale, I really tried to apply myself whenever I could towards this kind of goal, because really when I'm left in a space to pursue my passion, I'm just going to pursue my passion. But then I think a lot more life lessons started to happen when I would leave the university to go actually work professionally. So I had done internships. I did an internship in New York, which I thought was like the coolest thing. I can't say which company, but let's just say I'll put it. Oh wait, I'm on record, so I really can't say which company. I'll just say it was actually a British-based company that does a lot of really great reality shows with colorful personalities, and that's all I'll say. But then I ended up thinking, oh well, you know, I went to Yale, I should be able to be doing the cool producer work, right? No. I was an intern, and so I did intern stuff, and I didn't even do intern stuff very well. I was yelled at constantly. They really wanted to fire me, but they couldn't because I was unpaid. So like there was this weird dynamic, and they just kind of tolerated me until I had to go back to Yale. And actually, after Yale, my very first job was working in public access. I was working in video and film production, technically. And I got yelled at all the time because I kept falling asleep because the work was so boring. I was in government meetings and just like, oh, I gotta stay awake next time. But it's just really tough to stay awake during a government meeting when you're on camera. Next job I got was working in television, which was actually kind of fun, but it was nothing at all like what I expected it to be. Working in a TV job was just like, it was not, you don't do much production. You actually end up doing a lot of business, and you treat it much more like a business. Sorry, Annalise, I think I've gotten off the rails a little bit. To remind me what question I'm supposed to answer. I think I'm answering it, but I could be totally wrong.
I mean, yeah, it was just about sort of what your motivation was for
Gotcha.
in this
Okay.
career.
I think the way that I can best answer like that is because it's a career that I was passionate about, but then also became disillusioned by. So around this time of working television, I was like, I don't want to work in television because it's really corporate. It's really just all about the money. They don't really do anything creative, and I'm not mentally stimulated, and that's why I'm going to graduate school. But the real reason why I went to graduate school is because someone gave me a DVD of a film called The Rebel, which came out in 2007. And The Rebel is this awesome, cool film made in Vietnam, but with an amazing production quality, starring like Dustin Nguyen and many other people who were just like, to me, like gods among people. And I was like, wait, who's putting this together? How did this film exist? Like, are you telling me that like people with my weird last name and background are suddenly making this happen, making actually industry happen? So I decided to go find them, but that I wanted to do it in a different way. And I wanted to do it in a way that still felt intellectual. And that's what led me to go to like California and get a graduate degree in anthropology and become an anthropologist, but really just be an anthropologist that hangs out with filmmakers all the time. It's totally like weird and awesome, but super academic. And I think to answer this question is really difficult because it implies that like, I kind of know the answer to this. All I can tell you now is that I've constantly come back to it and then gone away from it. And very recent, in the last 2 or 3 years, is when I've come back to it. And I think the best way I can answer it is that like the way that I feel when I'm engaging or writing or making things is different from any other thing that I've ever done. And that includes experiences that have been highly engaging. That includes experiences that involve working with brilliant people, or even making a lot of money, or traveling a lot, or what have you. There's nothing that has replaced that feeling for me. And I've realized that feeling is actually very tied to my own psyche. It's very tied to not only just these positive feelings, but also these feelings of alienation, of intergenerational violence, of a need to be seen, to be heard, to be expressed. And when that became the true motivation, that has become the greatest reinforcer of why I'm a filmmaker now and why I own that title. It's because, and it explains very much why, across all of these jobs, there's been this consistent thread for me to keep going back to when it comes to how I express myself, how I feel, and how I think of myself. And so I know that's a long-winded way. And it's really difficult to say, I just left school and became a filmmaker. No, I've done a bunch of different things, and I may continue to do a bunch of different things. But I know that my default setting that I've been sort of inclined to when I was at Yale, I can't seem to help but go back to now. And I think it might have been more efficient for me to just lean into that early on and commit to that forever. But life is weird, and I've not at all regretted any of the directions I've gone into. To know that by the end, like, it's made me more interesting person in the process.
Thank you. I guess I'm interested in, well, since a lot of your work is based in Southeast Asia, I believe East Films is based in Vietnam, right? I'm interested in what trends you see in the issues that filmmakers in Southeast Asia are looking to address, and are there certain issues that are underrepresented in film? And if you compare filmmakers from the region versus those from a more dominant Western film industry, for example, are there big differences in the issues that they're looking to address?
So I'm answering this one very nervously because, like, one of my co-founders is in this call and, like, is also probably a far better expert on this than I am, but I'm going to answer it to the best of my ability since I had some experience. So I guess I'm going to try to, like, answer it simply by, this is a question about what Southeast Asian filmmaking is kind of like right now, and how that might compare to what we kind of think of as dominant forms of it. I think the one thing that I have learned going out to Asia, and very recently I was in Korea as well, which is just a cool place to be for filmmaking right now, is to get away from the notion that America is the center of the world, and that there's actually really interesting things happening that have nothing to do with what Americans are thinking. That's sort of a bold statement I'm going to say. And not to say that the Americans aren't still major players, if not the top players in this, but the game is changing a lot, and where that interest and investment and conversations come from don't necessarily have to go through Los Angeles or New York. They actually might stay directly in one region. So I'm more of an expert on what's happening in Vietnam. So I will speak more to that. The one big thing is that's really difficult, I think, for people who are American and also a part of the diaspora, is that they aren't really, there's no issue with the war, so to speak, right? There isn't really a conversation or an interest or an engagement with that topic. So after 1975, when after the fall of Saigon, everyone afterwards, like, there was a big baby boom, and now that's been, what, 41 years later, over half of the population of Vietnam is under 40, right? It's like most people did not experience that. They kind of only know it from history and from whatever history they could get their hands on. And so they're not talking about these things that in many circles that we've heard over in America, that's what everyone's talking about, right? In America, the only interest in Vietnam is related to the war. And so to sort of getting away from that and getting towards maybe a much more humanistic understanding of what needs to be told and what kind of stories they're engaging with now is the big move, I would say. I think a lot of it there are local issues. There are regional things that are in play when it comes to Southeast Asia, right? There's the question of how people relate to countries like China or Korea. There are issues of, like, economic boom and economic struggles. They have their own religions. They have their own, like, way of using the internet. To me, I think it's the coolest thing that, like, early in this whole coronavirus, like, I guess, epidemic, the fun viral video about how to wash your hands came out of Vietnam, of all places. And that made me proud for like 2 weeks until everyone just had to stay home. So, like, there are quirks and nuances, and I think that's why I'm grateful to have studied anthropology, is because it allows me to think proactively about how to cater to those things when we're doing our own work. And instead of just say, here's what you need to be told, to actually sit and listen. Okay, so like, what entertains you, what interests you, and to let that conversation happen. Beyond that, like, the one thing I try to remind people is that, like, we are actually way, 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 way more similar as a human race than we are as individual groups, right? We are ridiculously similar. It's phenomenal that we can speak languages and eat foods and all pretty much more or less respond to sriracha the same way. Like, it's awesome, right? And that's something I want people to lean into when it comes to the way they think about storytelling, is that you know, some of the stories that you think might appeal to you actually will appeal to anybody if you just allow that experience to happen. So what we've seen in Vietnam in particular, for example, in Southeast Asia, is that romantic comedies are a really safe bet. They're pretty popular. Like, I don't know if you watch K-dramas, I do. And like, you know, you're not gonna go wrong appealing regardless of the cultural context. What you'll also see is that because of those localizations, you'll see people remaking things all the time. And to me, I don't necessarily find those as, oh, they're not original. They don't have any, like, first, writing an original story is really hard. So that's just move on for that. Second, when a story is told in a different cultural context, it goes through so much iteration and so much nuance and so much recasting and recalibration that it almost ends up being its own story, right? And if you really think about it, like any other story you maybe seen or heard in the past that you thought, oh, like, I've never seen anything like this before, it came from somewhere. It probably came from somewhere. So so just relax and let people be creative. Just let people rip. It's fine. You know, there's so many different ways to talk about this. I think, you know, but I would say this question of like dominance, or like from America, you know, the story that has always been compelling to me has been the fact that a lot of people who grew up like me, either in America or came to America at a young age, studied film from the top schools, couldn't find work in America, and then ended up going to Vietnam and finding themselves there to an extent. There's a story that came out of East recently by one of our directors, Bao Nguyen, who actually did a documentary that premiered at Sundance called Be Water. And I like to summarize the story of that as, here's an American-born person with a Chinese face and 1/4 German blood. So he's actually Hapa, right? He was rejected by Americans because he looked too Chinese. And then he also was rejected initially by people from Hong Kong because he was acting too cocky American. And he just made it work, and he became a superstar, but he died before he could really see how big of a superstar he was. Like, this is, I mean, I'm not in specifically the same ethnicity as Bruce Lee, but like, that story is like the one that connects with me so strongly. And I think when we think about things like transnational experiences and also the uniqueness of that spirit, that indomitable spirit to create, that's the best thing I can take away from, like, and what makes me passionate about being a storyteller, is to be able to compel people in that way.
And then I guess quickly before we open it up to Q&A, because you talked a little bit about, like you mentioned, the wars in Vietnam, I was wondering, although these are, you know, definitely not the only stories, and nor should they be considered as such, there are so many contemporary stories from Southeast Asia that are tied to a very recent history, and in some places even a persisting presence of violence and trauma and genocide. And I know it's a big question, but do you see a responsibility in how we tell those stories and who tells them and who they are told to?
Yes. I think the first part of that question is about, you know, and this is stuff that's deeply personal for me as well, is that I think of film as a form of therapy. And when I just lived in Seattle recently and I moved back here, but before then I was involved with and had even raised some money for a nonprofit called the Asian Counseling Resource Services. And they mostly cater to a Southeast Asian clientele, largely Vietnamese. And had I still lived there longer, I probably would have been there teaching them how to use computers. But because I know some Vietnamese, like, it's a way for me to give to the community. And I think and this is not something exclusive to Vietnamese, in that I should mention because one filmmaker corrected us who's from that region, said, who's a filmmaker, says, you know, you people call it the Vietnam War, but it really should be called the Southeast Asian War because it affected so many different countries out there and had such a massive effect on like the histories henceforth. So I'm interested in therapy a lot. I'm interested in healing. I'm interested in finding ways in which, even though I've never been to that war, why do I still feel it? And then the term intergenerational abuse and violence started becoming resonating to me as someone who realized, oh, like I actually do experience this war, but I'm experiencing it through other people who can't convey themselves, who can't express themselves. On top of the layer of the fact that, you know, I came to speaking Vietnamese late, so my ability to communicate with my family on these very difficult issues was not there. But the most compelling thing that always brought us together was watching films and watching videos and watching like Paris by Nights. And the more and more that anytime I find a film and I throw it in front of them, even if it sucks, they're going to watch it because they want to give it that consideration. Because when they see themselves on screen and see a representation of themselves doing something that is humanized, that is central, that is part, if not integral to the narrative, that's important to them. And that makes them feel less damaged. It makes them feel much more whole. So that's what motivates me is, you know, it's the coolest thing now where, and I'm doing my work and I just want to insist that I'm totally a dork. I don't do very cool things all the time. But every so often, like I might hang out, I'll be at this event and then I'll put a photo of myself on Facebook and I'm like, oh yeah, that's this person. My mom will like call me and it's like, you know, that was like my celebrity crush back when I was in Vietnam. That person's like the coolest person. Oh my gosh, you just took a photo. I'm like, yeah, they're really nice. You know, they hang out, they eat like banh mi with the rest of us. You know, like, and that's kind of like been the fun like storytelling side of being in this world is that it's relatively accessible, but you got to come at it with a very genuine heart and a true sense of passion towards advancing this cause. But I think it only took me really maybe until like a year ago to realize the words around what I'm trying to articulate. Like I didn't understand that this is what I kept doing. This is what I wanted to do. This is what I would venture back to every time. Like I just feel like I needed to, because this always felt like the thing that I was meant to do, you know? That's the best way I can explain that. And I'm grateful at least for even being at Yale and being going to graduate school and those experiences giving me the words and the language and the critical thinking for me to like articulate what's happening here.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lee. I mean, so much of what you said in that answer really resonates with, you know, my personal experience, and the sort of things, the questions I'm trying to deal with, as I'm sure it resonates with many people as well. So yeah, we can open it up to questions now. Dan, do you want to? Are there any from the poll everywhere? Other people are just welcome to unmute themselves and ask questions.
Yeah, so we only have 2 questions from poll everywhere, but if anyone who have any questions right now, you can feel free to ask your questions. My question on the poll is that, do you have advice for current undergraduate who are learning to navigate their life at Yale?
So may I ask a question to Lee?
Oh no.
So thank you, Lee, for sharing stories and anecdotes. And I remember Lee's, you know, Lee's. I don't think you are a morning person. You know, well, you know what I meant.
I know exactly where you're going with this. Hey,
yeah, but
your class is so early.
No, it was at 9:30 in the morning.
9:30 is early for an undergraduate.
But I have good memories of you, and I have been following you, actually on Facebook for so many years. I thought that you went into academics, academia, and became a professors or researchers. But it's good to turn out that you are going to business and filming. So my question is that perhaps you only knew that there are a few movies coming out of Vietnam, and also film that was made by Vietnamese Americans. So can you touch a little bit on the future or the state of Vietnamese American filmings? And I saw some names, you know, in the big movie busters, Vietnamese American names as producers, but a few directors also. So what do you think? What are the futures?
Very, very challenging question for me to ask, only because I'll just be frank. This COVID-19 has not been great for filmmaking, not been great for the arts, not been great for those who support the arts, including film festivals, including like productions. All of that has grinded to a halt. And that's been, you know, a challenge, but it doesn't necessarily mean things are dead. They just mean things are heavily postponed. And that really just depends on when things open up again. I've been more following, you know, the last several years, and I think I'd say, like, there was a time where we'd see almost on average like a film or two coming out who's directed by a new Vietnamese American director, or a overseas Vietnamese director. And there's a lot of different challenges, I think, as to why it's not that common that there might be a handful of directors who still work again and again and again. And there are mostly directors who actually will just, they did their one project or do a couple projects and they would prefer to help out in other capacities too. And it's challenging to explain why, but because there's a lot of different nuances when it comes to being an artist. I'll be honest, I used to direct a lot, and there are times where I do find myself in that role, but I don't enjoy it. I don't have the personality for it. I don't have the temperament for it. You're basically a CEO of a film for 2 years. I think I speak in business terms, and honestly, I think that's the best way you can understand what filmmaking is really like. So when you're a director, you're a CEO. You're basically in the helm of making this happen, and if you don't make it happen, you're kicked off the project. And you know, you have to deal with a lot of different stakeholders, a lot of different choices, and a lot of different personalities, especially creative personalities who might be challenging to manage. So a lot of directors, regardless of whether it's Vietnam or elsewhere, will they'll work with the same people, and they'll kind of keep it in, like, close to their chest, because they can trust those people and their process a bit more. Or some people, you know, honestly don't love to work out in Vietnam. It doesn't have, the margins aren't as high as it might be if they get an opportunity to work out in America or abroad. And so, and there are many directors who've never had to have that experience. I'm rambling at this point. I'll try to wrap up by like, so my personal hero growing up, even at Yale, I actually met the star of his film at Yale. But it was Tony Bui, who directed the film 3 Seasons, which came out in 1996, I want to believe. And it was a Sundance darling because it won the Grand Jury Prize, the Audience Award, and the Best Cinematography Award. And it's amazing to say that now, like, I thought Tony was a god, and like years later, I actually met him at the Hawaii International Film Festival, and we just hung out, and he's a very cool person. But while he's very humble, he also will work with celebrities all the time, and he'll be asked to be brought in on projects here and there. And sometimes it just simply means, you know, like, it's not necessarily like this the responsibility, I guess, to answer a previous question, or impetus that, like, if you are an Asian American filmmaker, you have to make films in this space with these people for this audience, etc. Some people just say, hey, that was cool, now I want to go make something new, right? You know, Crazy Rich Asians' John Chu didn't always make, that actually technically was one of his first films making for Asians. He directed a documentary about Justin Bieber. He did like a Fast and Furious film, I think. I don't, you know what I mean? Like, it's like everyone has these investments and some people don't. I've just disclosed like why, like, yeah, I could probably go work in Hollywood if I wanted to and just wing it and not care about these things. But I just happen to care about these audiences and stories and themes. So that's the best way I can answer that.
Yeah, thank you, Lee.
Yeah, I know you.
Thank you. So I'll ask the poll everywhere question, since Dan seems to be cutting out a lot. Someone asked, what advice do you have for undergrads who are learning to navigate their life after Yale?
Oh. I hate no. I think I did have. Yes, I did have like written statements for this because I believe in like oof. I've thought about this a lot. So someone actually told me this because she was preparing to do the graduation speech for the class of 2015 at Calhoun College, right? Or now Hopper. Live your life as if Yale is the least interesting thing about it. That has been the most compelling way for me to think about my life. And I'll be honest, I don't tell people I go to Yale, only because the whole dynamic changes. They treat me like I'm both better and worse at them. And I'm just kind of there as this guy who just went to college somewhere, and I've got fun stories. But I used to be one of those people, especially when I was at Yale, because I was so happy and proud to constantly talk about like the cool thing that happened in my school. But like not everybody I knew went to Yale, so like they just thought I was a jerk for constantly talking about Yale. I realize now that, yeah, it was cool. It was great. I'm very proud. And I think through certain audiences, I'll ramp it up. But in general, I am going to be more proud of the things that I've done in the last 15 years since. And I hope to be more proud of the things that come afterwards. I hope that this was not necessarily like the reason, like if that's the only thing that is worth talking about you when your career, then like try harder. I mean, honestly, this wasn't like, there's just so much more to do. Honestly, I think another thing I wanted to tell people is don't let your pride get in the way, but also don't let your shame get in the way too, right? I think it's a very easy space to develop ego, college in general, not just Yale, but college. But it's also a very easy space to develop imposter syndrome. And I'm going to tell you up front, I've had the worst case of it everywhere I go. And it doesn't serve anything to think that you can or can't do it, aside from self-validation. Like if you think you can't do it, then you're right. But if you think you can do it, you're also right. And it's not, me telling you this is purely condescending to you. This is a journey you have to take. This is a journey of being okay with failure, and really, really failing and being okay. Like when I went to Yale, I got a B and I cried. Like that's how bad things used to be. And then like after that, I've gotten fired from jobs, and I've gotten like laid off, and I've had a lot of crazy things happen to me professionally and personally that matter way, way, way more than getting a B. I won't tell you what class it was, but it was Formac, and I'm very embarrassed. Yes, I got a B in Formac. It's very embarrassing. You don't get a B in Formac, but somehow I did. But like it's all ego. It's all in my head. No one cares. And if they do care, like they don't matter. Like the only thing that matters are the things that you do, not just for yourself, but for other people as well. I wish I wasn't this way, and I would ask you all to be the same, is not to be so judgmental of one another, not to care so much that that person's doing this, or that person got into there, or that person's on this track. That stuff does not matter once you leave school. Like no one thinks about it. No one's even like, and I think a lot of those kinds of ego-driven competitive dynamics really ruined issues rather than, oh, I just wish I was much more supportive of my friend. I wish like, hey man, you got into that school, that's awesome. You got into that program, that's awesome. You dating that person I like, that's awesome. It's fine. And I remember someone at a Creative Mornings talk in London held up a sign that I absolutely love. And it basically just said, work really hard, take care of yourself, and be nice to people. That's all the sign said. And I don't know what else to tell you, but really just do that, and life will be really cool and interesting. I'm not going to promise you that you're going to get wherever you want. Honestly, I didn't. I don't think most people do. And many of the people that do get whatever they want, like that feeling of glory doesn't always last. To be very frank, like if you do just work hard, take care of yourself, and that includes exercising, dieting right, sleeping well. Please sleep well. Just like even though Vietnamese class is at 9:30 in the morning, like you gotta sleep well. That whole thing. But like because of those very simple things, like I'm very grateful of the successes that I've had, and I'm very grateful of the connections I made along the way and the stories I can tell from that. And it sounds as basic as you can get when it comes to how to live your life, but it's really not that more nuanced. So those are the things I actually did write down before this because I wanted to share that. So
Thank you. We have a question from Andrew in the chat. Andrew, would you like to ask it?
oh, come on, Andrew. I know Andrew.
Hey Lee, with Thor Ragnarok hiring a non-traditional director, Taika Waititi, do you think that this massive success of Ragnarok furthered the argument for more non-traditional directors that really still have fallen in love with and engaged the artist's creative spirit versus just the cut and dried, you know, methods of this is what they did, so we'll do this. I mean, I think Ragnarok really crushed a lot of preconceived molds.
How to answer this question? Only because like I think Taika's an amazing filmmaker, and especially having him win the Academy Award for his screenplay for Jojo Rabbit, and also acknowledging Indigenous people because Taika Waititi is part Maori from New Zealand, yet is writing a tale about, you know, the Hitler Youth near the end of World War II. I think, you know, but if the question is really about the inclusion of non-traditional directors, I'm all for it. Do I think that film started that trend? I think it's certainly, I guess it's really challenging to pinpoint when did that begin, right? When did something avant-garde begin, and what did like stories and pieces that normally wouldn't have been approved suddenly got approved? I guess I'll say broadly, I'm ragingly supportive of like filmmakers who don't normally come from this normal cloth of what we think a filmmaker should look and sound like. And that includes not just people of color, that includes women, that includes genderqueer people, differently abled people, etc. Like all of those categories, because traditionally, especially when you're in the director's chair or producer's chair, it's a male-dominated industry. It's largely Caucasian if you're in America, or if you're in other countries, it's just largely what you think it is to another extreme. And you know, I don't even know. Sometimes I'm even to the left of Lenin when it comes to my own politics, but that speaks very closely to art as well. But that's just my own personal agenda. I'm going to be just card carrying about it. Like, I majored in sociology. I studied I've collaborated with mostly political action committees on a certain side of the politics. The professor that inspired me a lot growing up at Yale, she's now at Columbia and also running the Social Science Research Council, I believe, Alondra Nelson. She had nothing to do with Asian American studies whatsoever, in her own work on how the whole DNA community and how people are acquiring DNA is really problematic for African Americans, right? And how we should really look into that a little bit more. You should check out her work; it's awesome. But she has collaborated with Asian Americans on her own scholarship, and that sort of empathy toward mutual empathy towards her work and whatever work I might be up to is the kind of stuff that happens as well. So so to answer your question, and again, I'm really bad at answering it directly. I think there has been a increased trend towards films that you normally wouldn't see before. But I do believe that it also means for everybody in this room to go see films that are actually not that easy to see, to go to see films that premiere your art house film festival or at the local theater that doesn't care about what the big studios are putting out. They're actually trying to support filmmakers. That's the best way to support filmmakers, and that's the best way to give them the validation to not only share their work but support it, and that even includes watching the work on Netflix and Amazon. That's probably the best way you can really get these stories, is to go online, because they're getting those deals and they're getting distribution. But if we're not focusing on them, and if we're not giving them any of those kinds of metrics, even if they aren't great, to be honest, because this industry runs on our participation and our investment into them, not on strictly just what is politically right. Like it has to be validated with data, with money, etc. But yeah, Thor and Ragnarok rules. So I'll argue that to the grave.
Thanks, Lee. So it's a little past 9 p.m. And I want to be respectful of your time, but are you okay to take a couple more questions?
I do have an engagement in an hour. I don't want to tell you what it is, but it's really dumb. But yeah, I can stick around. I think I'll stick around till maybe 6:30.
Okay.
Or 9:30 for East Coast.
So someone else asked in the poll everywhere if you have any advice for building a mentorship community, as well as finding opportunities such as internships in a creative practice.
Gotcha. So first part is mentoring, right? Now, I mean, it's funny because like, I mean, I consider like Pei Wang a mentor. I consider some people in this call mentor. What is a mentor, right? And it's not, you know, Yoda, or maybe, I don't know. A mentor to me, just simply defined, is someone whose wisdom, knowledge, experiences that you'd love to gain a little bit of insight from, right? And like to learn from. So being in a school like Yale, you're actually surrounded by mentors all the time. They're just called professors. And to like create those kinds of relationships that last decades is really largely on you. The professor is there to teach you, but if you want to be a special, fun case so that like every time they see or think of you, they smile and they bring up anecdotes of how you used to fall asleep in their class all the time in a public professional setting, like there you go, right? You know, I've had mentors in not just in college, but like in every workplace. I mean, I don't necessarily vibe with everybody, I know this, but I like to say that every so often there's always one or two people who I really click with, and I just go have coffee with them and we just talk, right? And I just absorb their knowledge. It's almost like there's like this big brotherly kind of dynamic that a brave, you know, sister or what have you, that you will form with them, and I think you're there to learn and you're there to develop that. But it is a two-way relationship. I think these are dynamics that can be challenging too. And I don't necessarily think, you know, like you can be the hustler type that like goes to a network meeting, sees like that celebrity that you've always wanted to meet and just go right up and try to make that happen. I'm not that kind of person. I like to respect people's privacy and time and presume they don't want to be with me. But I'm happy to say that there's like, you know, in my foundation work that I did, like I have to regard myself as a mentor to the youth that we work for, many of whom aren't at all like the people in this room, who may or may not go to college, who have been through crazy abusive backgrounds, who have drugs in their system, and like this, and like many people gave up on them. And it was our work to try to just give them a sense of dignity and give them a sense of, hey, like, I don't necessarily believe that you have to do this, but I just want you to believe that you can do something so that the next thing that comes your way will go from there. And now, you know, these are young men that I mostly work with, and young women and etc., who are like, might follow me on Instagram or whatever, but like we support each other and we support each other in the ways that we can. I'm still trying to learn things, but I'm at least grateful to, you know that like the best thing I can do is try to pass that knowledge along. Your second question was about, okay, so I actually did want to write down a few opportunities for people, because you know, one, I did mention the Souther Fund, and that's been rebranded, which actually sounds a lot better because I never knew who Souther was. But it's about opportunities for Asian Americans in particular who are interested in film, and I wrote down 4 that I think are great. There are many, many, many more, but right now is actually a really cool time to be an Asian American in film. It's never been like this. Like when I was in college, people were like, yeah, okay. We like all the work I could ever acquire were like martial arts related stuff. And I wasn't even that good at martial arts, but like that's all that people seem to think I could do to contribute to that space rather than anything more. And that's really frustrating, right? But now it's evolved to the point where, yeah, there are amazing opportunities. One is the Center for Asian American Media, or CAM. They do a fellowship, and they're based out in San Francisco. They're fantastic. And I don't know how, I mean, I'm actually, you know what, I'm going to be super cool and type as I write. like that. They are a wonderful resource and tend to be one of the major go-to events or organizations for Asian American support. There's one, so Visual Communications is based out in LA, and they run the Asian American or Los Angeles Asia Pacific Film Festival, amongst many other things, and they have a lot of programs and festivals that support organizations like that as well. Okay, the Coalition for Asian Pacifics and Entertainment. Excuse me, Entertainment, or CAPE, has a new writers fellowship for people who just have screenplays, TV, etc. And they're a fantastic resource, also based out in LA. And I think one of the more like beloved, prestigious ones are the Asian American Artists, or A3, Sundance Fellowship. This one is specific for Asian Americans, but it's actually run by Sundance, which is America's most prestigious independent film festival. And that's just 4 that I really looked up today. There are a lot more out there, and it's a really cool time to submit to these things. They're highly competitive, of course, but at the very least, even if you get in or don't get in, you should just attend these events as they come up and hang out with us. Honestly, we're so much fun. A lot of karaoke. Not even joking.
Wow, that's amazing. I'm like jealous now that I didn't know much about film when I started Yale. And I'm like, wow, maybe it's not too late to get in. But I'm really inspired by all the storytelling that you have done and everything you shared today about your journey. So that's all the question we have for you. But definitely, I will write a follow-up for the event with all the resources that you just list as well. Like share what you had to say today in like writing context, so that everyone who could not follow today webinar could also have access to them. But yeah, that's formally ends all the question we have for you, unless everyone have any questions or want to stay around. That concludes our webinar. We're super grateful for Lee present today, and definitely that's what remind me of what it means to be in the community and to be supportive of each other.
All right. Well,
Thank you so much, Lee. Yeah. Thank you, Dan.
I hope to see you soon, Taiwan.
Everyone, please join me in clapping for Lee if you can. Show a handshake.
Very embarrassed.
Yes. Amazing. We'll screenshot this and share it. Thank you so much.
And sorry, Dan, where is the write-up going to be released?
It'll be on our Facebook page, and then for everyone who input their email in the Eventbrite form, you will receive an email from us.
And Lee, is it okay with you to share a way to contact you for anyone who wants to continue the conversation? Oh, there it is.
That's my email since 2005. I got it from an invite from another friend at Yale. It was like when Gmail was like, hey, Gmail's doing email, or Google's doing email. That's cool. And it was really exclusive. Yeah. Well, see, this is back in the day where nobody had, like, we didn't have smartphones. I got my first smartphone in 2003, and that was after everyone pressured me, like, dude, you need a phone or else we're not going to be friends with you anymore.
It's like this thing to TikTok right now, and I don't really understand it.
So that's my email. I am on social media, but I just want to warn you all that I'm really ridiculous on social media. So if you want to be in the see, like Ella knows, Ella's my like fake baby sister from the anime community in Portland, and she's amazing. I learned a lot from her. But like that's how you build community. I'll be freaking honest. Like, you got to be silly.
True. Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions, thoughts, concerns? All right. Okay, thank you so much. This was so much fun. I'm a little tired, but wow, what a journey. Okay, well, and I really, I do want to say, I wish you all the best of luck. I know it's really a crazy, weird time, but and I will honestly, I've had a long, complicated relationship with being from Yale, just because like it's something to both be proud of, but it's also something that people might use against you. And
in the end of the day, I've learned that it's very possible to be confident yet humble. It's very possible to be possibly proud, but not let it get to you in a way that like affects the kind of person you should be. And ultimately, my hope is that you all, whether you are successful or an artist, because it's not always the same thing, that you're just good people. And I think that's the best I can ask for anyone.
Thank you so much. I think that's a good note to end on.
All right.
All right, everyone. Have a good day.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Bye, Thai.
Yeah, take care, Lee. Hope to see you soon.
Hi, Thai. Or do you want to stay?
Hi, Dan. Yeah. Thank
Hey.
you for this.
Yeah. It's too bad we couldn't bring him back to campus because we originally planned to like fly him in, but then COVID happened, so we made the best of it using the webinar. Yeah.
That's a good idea that you organize this one.
Yeah. Thank you for your support. I love that you like just call him out in the call. He's just like so silly about it too. So definitely something that we all relate to.
Yeah. Be safe. All
Yeah.
right.
Bye.